Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 625, and today is June 28th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We have a lot to talk about on today's show. I did suffer through that debate last night, so I'll have a little bit of a recap there for y'all at the start of it, and then we'll get into the big news of the day. As always, you can share the show from the Libertarian Institute, the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee, anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts, and of course, from my Twitter feed at KyleAnzalone_, where I post all the news I write, stories I think are important, and every show that I put out. So everyone, let's get into it, and let's just start off talking a little bit about the debate. So my impression of the debate was that Trump won, and not really on substance or policy or because he argued anything better than Biden, but just because he spoke and argued better than Biden. Joe Biden at times, apparently Axios reported like halfway through the debate that the president had a cold. So I'm not trying to make excuses for him in any way, but he certainly looked like he had a cold. And after the debate, I thought one of the really interesting things, I have a list here that I'm going to read off of that our friend Will Porter actually compiled, and it's in the Libertarian Institute newsletter. If you guys want to sign up for that, go over to the Libertarian Institute and sign up for our email list, and you'll get these pretty good debriefs from Will Porter in your inbox most days of the week. And so, I thought this was really interesting because typically the mainstream media is going to try to spin for Joe Biden and try to make him look better than he actually was. And in this case, I feel like they were a little bit harsher on the president than he actually performed. So New York Times, Biden struggles as Trump blusters in contentious debate. HuffPost, raspy and rambling, Joe Biden fumbles through debate with Donald Trump. NBC, Biden's presidential debate performance sends Democrats into panic. CBS, Biden struggles early in presidential debate with hoarse voice. BBC, Biden struggles in debate as personal attacks fly. Wall Street Journal, Biden struggles to allay concerns over age. The Hill, Biden debate performance is nightmare for Democrats. Politico, Dems freak out over Biden's debate performance. Quote, Biden is toast. And this was just one of not one of, but those are the first 8 of maybe 20 or so headlines that I read over the past 24 hours that were extremely critical of the president. Again, I think a lot of this commentary would be more critical of Biden's debate performance than I was. Now, I don't agree with the president on very much. I don't think he got very much right, but I do think there were times where he did a little bit better going back and forth with Donald Trump than they seem to have taken in the mainstream media. Now, there were a couple huge lies in that debate, and while a lot of them don't have to do with foreign policy, so I'm not going to get into them, there were a couple, particularly that Biden told on foreign policy, that I really don't think I could let go unaddressed. The one is Biden said he's the only president in the 20th century, I guess he meant 21st, to not have any U.S. troops die under his watch, which of course is a lie given what happened during the withdrawal of Afghanistan. He claimed that there was a, quote, this is a quote from Biden, full-blown intercontinental ballistic missile attack on Israel by Iran. Well, Iran doesn't have intercontinental ballistic missiles. Of course, he's referring to the drone and cruise missile attack on Iran, but all those were medium-range missiles or drones, cruise missiles, but there were no intercontinental ballistic missiles there. And not only that, Iran wouldn't need an ICBM to hit Israel because, it's only hundreds of miles and not thousands and thousands of miles away from each other. I think it's over 1,000, but still not in the range of an ICBM. So those were two of the big ones on foreign policy that I think Biden got wrong. Now, I was really hoping, and this is always the thing with Donald Trump, right? Where you're kind of hoping that he's able to make a coherent argument, and he never is, right? It's not, A plus B equals C. He's going to ramble along. He's going to go A plus E equals F, and then he's going to talk about C and D, but not really relate them to the initial thing he's talking about. And so it's always a mess. So I wish he would have been very clear and really had challenged Biden on the Hunter Biden laptop stuff, because this is really important. There's a really good article by Paul Sperry in Real Clear Investigations where he goes over how James Clapper has manipulated the last two presidential elections. Of course, this is the former CIA director, certainly DNI, James Clapper. And so Clapper was interfered in these debates by trying to make it look like Russia was getting involved in our election. So first in 2016, giving credence to Hillary Clinton's claims that the DNC emails came from WikiLeaks through Russia, which of course was a complete lie, that in any way Russia helped Trump to win that election. These are the lies that he was spinning before these debates. And then of course in 2020, right before the election, he led that letter that said the the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, which of course, again, just a complete and utter lie. And so Trump could have really challenged Biden on these issues, and I think could have scored some major points, but he didn't. On foreign policy, Trump was, I want to say, maybe a little bit worse than Joe Biden as far as the extent that policy was actually talked about. It wasn't much. At one point, Trump claimed Biden had become like a Palestinian over his supposed lack of support for Israel, which of course doesn't exist. He then went on to call Biden a very bad Palestinian and a weak one. So that was just kind of absurd. Trump was a little bit better on Ukraine stuff, I would say, talking about seeking an end to the conflict, but really didn't say anything so meaningful that I think he really has a plan to end this war or will do so. All right, I think that's all I have on the debate. If anybody has any real questions, things from the debate they would like me to address, I'm willing to do it. I don't want to, get into talking about abortion or the president's golf scores. Those are just things that I don't cover. Although I gotta say the golf score debate was probably the most substantive exchange of the entire night. So that was a little bit interesting on what these men can actually articulately talk about in a kind of understandable way. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the debate. Now let's get into just the regular news today. All right, first up here, this is what I wrote for antiwar.com on June 27th. Zelensky, we don't have a lot of time. Speaking to journalists in Brussels on Thursday, Ukrainian President Zelensky warned, we do not have much time. We have a lot of injured, killed, both military and civilians, so we do not want this war to last for years. Therefore, we had to prepare this plan and put it on the table at the Second Peace Summit. Zelensky stressed the need for a peace process that would bring an end to the war with Russia, citing Ukraine's mounting casualties. Since 2022, Zelensky has pushed a 10-point peace plan that would see Russia withdraw from all of Ukraine's pre-2014 territory. So that would include Donbass, Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson. The Kremlin has outright rejected that proposal, insisting it would not give up several formerly Ukrainian regions it has annexed. Still, Zelensky proposed his formula to other world leaders at a peace summit that was held in Switzerland earlier this month, although no Russian officials were invited. Russian President Vladimir Putin has articulated a potential peace deal that would see Ukraine agree to denuclearization, neutrality towards NATO, and recognition of territory annexed by Moscow since 2014. As the war has progressed, the West has struggled to maintain the flow of weapons to Kiev, and Ukraine has been unable to replace its battlefield casualties with newly trained soldiers. The Kremlin has adjusted to a wartime economy and has a larger number of young men to serve in the military, giving Moscow a distinct advantage as the conflict has become a war of attrition. While Kiev and Moscow have been tight-lipped about their own casualty figures, estimates for both range in the hundreds of thousands. To fill its ranks, Ukraine has recently expanded conscription laws and cracked down on those avoiding the draft. The ex-head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine estimate the number of dead or seriously wounded Ukrainian soldiers to be over 500,000 in January. So very concerning there. Interesting statement from Zelensky. Usually he doesn't say things that could be interpreted quite so negatively. So we will see in the coming days if, maybe Ukraine is really getting more worried here. At the same time, the peace process that Zelensky is pushing is this, unilateral peace process that Russia certainly isn't going to agree to. And so maybe this doesn't signal any real shift in policy. Zelensky is just acknowledging the number of dead and wounded Ukrainian soldiers. All right, next up here, this one from Connor Freeman. Moscow signals it may downgrade relations with the West. So Connor writes, amid recent escalations in the Ukraine proxy war, the Russian Federation is considering downgrading relations with the West, though no decision has been made yet. This comes less than a week after Kiev launched long-range missiles strike on Crimea, leaving 4 Russians dead, well over 100 wounded. Moscow vowed retaliatory measures will follow. Downgrading ties with the West as a result of NATO's proxy war in Ukraine would be unprecedented. At the height of the previous Cold War during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, relations between the two nuclear superpowers were never abandoned. Currently, the U.S. and its allies in Europe maintain embassies in Russia, and likewise, Moscow still operates diplomat facilities in Washington and European capitals. I think they also have one in New York City related to the United Nations. However, diplomats report working in the most hostile environment in decades. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Moscow is studying the issues and explained to a Russian outlet that the ambassadors have historically played an arduous but critical role, permitting communication channels to function during particularly tense periods. The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov described the issue of lowering the level of diplomatic relations as a standard practice for states facing unfriendly or hostile manifestations. He added, due to the growing involvement of the West in the conflict in Ukraine, the Russian Federation cannot consider various options for responding to such hostile Western intervention in the Ukrainian crisis. On Monday, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, said the U.S. and Ukraine involvement in the terrorist attack on the Crimean Peninsula was beyond doubt. The Foreign Ministry claimed U.S. intelligence was used to coordinate the bombing, which utilized U.S. supplies attack of missiles, noting a U.S. drone was operating nearby. The ministry declared Washington has effectively become a party to the war and threatened retaliatory measures. In recent weeks, several NATO states, including the U.S., Britain, France, Canada, Germany, Sweden, Poland, and Denmark, have given their Ukrainian proxy army the green light to launch Western-provided weapons into Russian mainland as well as Crimea. Russia has strongly admonished London for that decision and said that if its weapons are used for attacks on Russia, Moscow will respond in kind with strikes on British military sites in Ukraine and beyond. Paris is also leading an effort to deploy NATO troops to Ukraine to train Kiev's forces for the war with Russia. Additionally, the EU just adopted a plan to transfer more than $1 billion worth of arms purchased with interest from profits gained from stolen Russian sovereign assets and impose scores of sanctions on Moscow. Over the coming months, Copenhagen and Amsterdam said they will send F-16 fighter jets and clarified that they may be used for strikes in Russian territory as well. The outgoing NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg hailed the hawkish turn in world policy, insisting without a hint of irony that the Kremlin shouldn't interpret this as escalatory. Moscow views the planned F-16 transfer as a strategic threat, as the jets are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Kiev must store the warplanes on NATO territory, which Russia says can be legitimately targeted as well. The North Atlantic Alliance also has its sights set on China, which maintains no-limit partnership with Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin recently inked a defense pact with Pyongyang, which Washington threatened with obliteration and warned NATO is already moving there to Asia as to a permanent place of residence. This, of course, creates a threat to all countries in the region, including the Russian Federation. We are obliged to respond to this, and we will do it. Now, one thing I just want to add here, and that is, can you imagine if Trump was really able to articulate in that debate how Biden has made the world more unsafe for Americans with his escalations? You know, Biden's up there saying that we have to fight Ukraine and Russia or else they're going to start attacking NATO countries. And what Trump could have said, what's going to cause Russia to attack NATO countries is if you're storing F-16s and bases of NATO countries, and then you're using those F-16s to fly over Ukrainian territory and then attack Russian territory. Well, that's going to provoke Russia quite a bit. But of course, you know, Trump just doesn't understand that or can't articulate it, and it's always disappointing. All right, next up here, this one from Will Porter, Israel to send retired Patriot batteries to Ukraine. So the United States and Israel are in talks to supply up to 8 U.S.-made Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine, with hardware set to be drawn from Tel Aviv's arsenal, the Financial Times reported. The move is likely to upset relations between Israel and Russia, which have continued at a low level despite a massive Western push to isolate Moscow. Though the deal has not been finalized, FT described the ongoing discussions between senior officials from all three countries, citing 5 unnamed people familiar with the negotiations. Some of those sources added that the 8 Israeli-owned Patriot systems are currently on the table, but said that Kiev could end up getting fewer in the final agreement. In recent weeks, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba reportedly discussed the issue with his U.S. counterpart, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and then the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was also said to have conferred with Ukrainian President Zelensky's chief of staff while in Kiev, and Tel Aviv also held direct talks about this. Kuleba would not confirm the negotiations, but told the Financial Times that Ukraine continues to work with various countries around the world on obtaining additional Patriot systems. Kiev has so far received 4 Patriot batteries from the United States and Germany, though it's unclear how many remain intact following reports that several launchers were damaged by Russian missiles and in drone strikes. The Biden administration has signaled it will soon send more, and recently moved to reprioritize future Patriot sales to allow Ukraine to receive the interceptors faster than other customers. Zelensky had previously stated that his country needed at least 7 more Patriot systems to effectively defend its airspace, but he recently bumped that number up to 25 Patriot systems with 6 to 8 batteries each. He appears to have meant 6 to 8 launchers, as Patriot batteries consist of multiple launching platforms, in addition to radar and mobile command stations. Israel operates an older variant of the Patriot dating back some 3 decades, and last April said it was preparing to replace its aging batteries with more modern hardware. However, Tel Aviv continues to employ the system in its war with Hamas, and the weapons have not yet been discontinued due to concerns that tensions with the Iran-backed Hezbollah militant group could erupt into a full-blown war, the Financial Times reported. Though the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Israel has declined to supply lethal aid to Kiev, instead improving a small number of defensive weapons transfers, such as electronic jamming gear used to disable drones. Tel Aviv has sought to walk a tightrope in its relation with Moscow, as it seeks to maintain freedom of operation in Syria, where Russian troops remain deployed in support of President Bashar al-Assad. After Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he was considering stepped up military aid to Ukraine last year, the Kremlin warned the move would only escalate the war and vowed to destroy any gear Tel Aviv might provide. And then this was from the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova. She said, "We say that all countries that supply weapons to Ukraine should understand that we will consider these weapons to be legitimate targets for Russian armed forces. Any attempts, implemented or even unrealized but announced, for the supply of additional new or other weapons will lead to escalation of this crisis, and everyone should be aware of this." Another thing this does is, in early days of the war, Israel, and at that time Naftali Bennett was the prime minister and not Netanyahu, who maybe less interested in negotiating an end to this conflict, was involved in negotiations and did make some significant progress. And while it was ultimately the Istanbul Accords that nearly inked the deal, I think we could say that one really good thing that Naftali Bennett had done in his life was help to negotiate here and get the two sides to agree to some concessions early on in this conflict. And of course, this is essentially making sure that that never happens, right? The more Israel gets involved, the less likely they would be able to be in a position to moderate an end to this conflict. All right, next up here, this article I wrote for antiwar.com on June 27th. House votes to bar State Department from citing Gazan Health Ministry. So during the debate of the State Department funding bill, the House added a provision that would bar American diplomats from citing statistics from the Gaza Health Ministry. The amendment would prevent American diplomats from discussing the casualty figures produced by the Palestinian agency. On Thursday, the House voted 269 to 144 for an amendment to the Department of State Appropriations bill proposed by a bipartisan group led by Jared Merkowitz of Florida. He's a Democrat. The provision prohibits funds appropriated by this act to be made available to the State Department to cite statistics obtained from the Gaza Health Ministry. The amendment received bipartisan support. All but 14 Republicans voted yes, with Representative Paul Gosar and Matt Rosendale being the lone no votes. Massey and Gates were non-voting. The Democrats split support at 69 to 114. The Democratic leadership in the House elected not to endorse or oppose the amendment. During Israel's nearly 9-month-long onslaught in Gaza, the health ministry records nearly 38,000 deaths and over 85,000 injuries. Many of those injured have life-threatening wounds. The head of the UN Palestinian aid agency, UNRWA, estimates that over 2,000 children, or nearly 10 per day, have lost legs since October 7th. Prior to Israel's most recent military campaign in Gaza, the casualty figures were generally considered accurate and regularly cited by Western media. During Israel's Swords of Iron operations, the corporate press is starting to slant coverage of those numbers by asserting that Hamas runs the health ministry whenever the numbers are reported. However, many human rights groups and officials believe the official figures are an undercount. Save the Children estimates that in addition to the 15,000 dead Palestinian children counted by the health ministry, an additional 4,000 are unaccounted because their bodies had not been recovered. During the debate over Merkowitz's amendment, Rep. Rashida Tlaib blasted the provision as being a part of a decades-long coordinated effort by the House to erase Palestinians from existence. She added, "Today we are witnessing the apartheid Israeli government carry out a genocide in real time. This amendment is an attempt to hide it. My colleagues don't even want to acknowledge that Palestinians exist at all." Then I linked to the rest of her speech if anybody would like to watch it. Next up here, this one from Connor Freeman. IDF soldiers killed, 16 injured during West Bank refugee camp raid. So the IDF announced on Thursday that one soldier was killed and 16 others were wounded in a roadside bomb explosion during an overnight raid on the northern West Bank's Jenin refugee camp. Violence has surged under the Israeli occupation as the IDF, along with illegal settlers, have killed over 550 Palestinians, including nearly 140 children, since the war on the besieged Gaza Strip began. The IDF claims it was carrying out the raid around midnight between Wednesday and Thursday in search of members of Hamas network operating in the city of Jenin, as well as an adjacent camp. An IDF probe found that a Panther armored personnel carrier, APC, was hit with an improvised explosive device, IED, and caused minor injuries. When its second group of troops arrived and attempted to evacuate the soldiers within the APC, a second IED exploded and killed a sniper team commander. In the second detonation, multiple troops were wounded. The Times of Israel report that 16 soldiers were wounded by the bombs, one seriously, 5 moderately, and the rest lightly. Prior to the explosion rocking the APC, an armored IDF bulldozer and backhoe had torn up roads in an effort to detect any IEDs. This is the Israeli army's standard practice before sending in their lighter vehicles. The outlet added that still the two large IEDs were not discovered by the bulldozer and backhoe, and the military believes they were planted much deeper in the ground than usual, around 1.5 meters or 5 feet below the ground. Normally, such explosives are buried only a few dozen centimeters, 1 to 2 feet, under the roads, and the IDF was probing how the bombs were activated, either by wire or wirelessly. Findings at the scene indicate that both methods could have been used. Jenin's residents say the IDF also raided a pharmacy near the camp overnight, arresting people inside, adding bulldozers damaged infrastructure. Medical sources say a young Palestinian man who was wounded during the raid. The local news agency Wafa reported that he was injured by shrapnel from occupation bullets in the face, and that the occupation forces prevented ambulance crews from transporting him to the hospital. Additionally, Wafa said the Palestinian news agency reported there was a series of raids and searches of homes in the area. Violence broke out across the city centers, while the IDF fired tear gas at the Jenin government hospital and stormed it. The Israeli troops were said to have shot bullets at civilians and cars as well. By dawn, the Israeli army was still operating in the area, with dozens of snipers stationed on the roofs of houses and commercial buildings. Multiple people were reported to have been detained and taken to undisclosed location, following scores of reports in Israeli media as well as wider press detailing rampant torture and sexual abuse in place in such facilities. The Palestinian Prisoner Society said a minimum of 28 Palestinians, including 9 from Jenin, were rounded up by the IDF throughout the West Bank on Wednesday, which brought the total number of arrests to 9,430 since the assault on the Gaza Strip was launched. In recent weeks, Tel Aviv's raids on Jenin have killed several Palestinians. This latest raid comes after the footage went viral across several social media, showing the IDF had horizontally tied a 24-year-old Palestinian man to the bonnet of a military jeep while driving through Jenin. The visceral imagery sparked outrage. Francisca Alblisi, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights situation in the Palestinian territory, said the IDF was using a human shield, and it was not the first such incident. Following his torture, he told reporters in the hospital that he was hit after he stepped outside of his uncle's house during another raid. I tried to withdraw and get inside the house, but they started shooting. When the soldiers arrived, they stomped on my head, they hit my face, they injured my leg and hand. They were laughing and playing while they hit me. After being beaten more and tied to the Jeep, he received burns on his back and neck. I guess the hood of that Jeep was probably pretty hot. Absolutely disgusting what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians in the West Bank as well as in Gaza. All right, a couple stories on Lebanon here before we wrap up. Israeli Defense Minister vows to return Lebanon to the Stone Age. So Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Israel was preparing to send Lebanon back to the Stone Age with a massive bombing campaign. The White House desperately tries to avert White House desperately tries to avert a major war in the Middle East, but is not making progress. So after 3 days of meetings with top officials in Washington, Gallant told reporters that Israel preferred diplomacy but was willing to utterly destroy Lebanon. He said, "We do not want war, but we are preparing for every scenario. Hezbollah understands very well that we can inflict massive damage in Lebanon if a war is launched. Israel could bomb Lebanon back to the Stone Age, but we don't want to." Gallant's remarks come as tit-for-tat exchanges between Hezbollah and Israel are escalating into a major war that could see the U.S., Iran, and other militias across the Middle East enter the fray. After announcing it had operational plans ready for the attack, Israel started to move some military assets from near Gaza to its northern border. The White House has invested considerable effort into bringing the conflict in Lebanon and Gaza to a close. However, rather than pressuring Tel Aviv to de-escalate, Washington has tried to force Hezbollah and Hamas to accept Israeli demands. Last week, American officials told Beirut that Washington was unable to constrain Tel Aviv in hopes it would convince Hezbollah to back down. President Joe Biden has significant leverage he could use to rein in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but has largely refused to do so. While U.S. officials claim their diplomatic efforts are not stalled, an increasing number of countries worry war will break out and are asking their citizens to leave Lebanon. Last week, Biden's envoy Amos Hochstein visited Tel Aviv and Beirut, hoping to work on a deal to end the fighting. At the time, he pushed for a deal to end the war in Gaza, with the belief that that would lead to de-escalation on Israel's northern border. Hezbollah maintains it will end operations against Israel once the onslaught in Gaza comes to a close. Israel says it will not stop attacks on Lebanon until Hezbollah withdraws several miles from the border. Tel Aviv has decimated southern Lebanon, turning much of the area within 3 miles of the border into a dead zone. Now, with the Biden administration tactics flipped, with officials telling reporters that the deal to end the fighting across the Israel-Lebanon border must be separate from a Gaza ceasefire. The logic of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah is that it is all tied to Gaza, and until there is a ceasefire in Gaza, the firing at Israel won't stop. The Wall Street Journal reported a senior Biden official saying, and that official added, "We frankly completely reject this logic." And I have to say, this was very concerning to me. The White House seems like it is a total train wreck right now, that they have completely done a 180 on how they're planning to de-escalate the tensions in the region. It not only concerning, but shows just a complete disconnect. And I can't imagine for these parties that are trying to negotiate with the U.S. what it must be like if 1 week the U.S. is saying that we got to stop the war in Gaza to stop the war against Hezbollah, and then the next week saying that the two must be separated. It's just absolutely absurd and stupid. All right, Israel creating dead zone along Lebanon border. So the nearly 9-month-long war between Israel and Lebanon has prompted the Israeli Defense Forces to destroy nearly everything along the Lebanese side of the border. The daily attacks are making the area uninhabitable. Citing the satellite imagery, the Financial Times reports the IDF use of aerial bombardment, artillery shelling, and incinerated chemical weapon white phosphorus have made much of the 5-kilometer north of the blue line. The blue line is the Israel-Lebanon border, uninhabitable. Some entire neighborhoods in Lebanon have been systematically leveled. After the Israeli onslaught in Gaza began, Tel Aviv also got locked into a low-intensity war with Hezbollah. So far, the conflict has been limited to tit-for-tat daily strikes, but there have been slowly escalating. The fighting has killed hundreds in Lebanon and over 25 Israelis. Hundreds of thousands of civilians have been displaced from the border area, and large swaths of southern Lebanon have been decimated. The IDF is using white phosphorus weapons and even fireballs slung from trebuchets to set fire to farms and vegetation. An Israeli official claimed that Tel Aviv was not trying to create a dead zone or a buffer zone, but rather to clear the area of Hamas. Hezbollah. We just want Hezbollah pushed back, the official said. We have to clean out the area of Hezbollah's presence. Tel Aviv justifies the destruction by claiming Hezbollah uses civilians as human shields, and Israeli officials made similar arguments about the case in Gaza. A senior Israeli military official told the Financial Times every third home in southern Lebanon is used by Hezbollah for weapons storage, training, fighting positions, and meeting points for possible cross-border attacks. While the U.S. has been attempting to achieve a diplomatic resolution to the conflict, Israel and Hezbollah remain at impasse. The Lebanese organization says its military operations are aimed at drawing some of Israel's military resources away from Gaza and will cease attacks on Israel once the onslaught against the Palestinians is over. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to say he will not end the military operations in Gaza, and Tel Aviv demands Hezbollah withdraw several miles from the border to an area north of the Litani River. In recent weeks, international concerns have spiked that a major war between the IDF and Hezbollah will break out. The White House has made some proposals, but refusing to place any pressure on Tel Aviv to wind down military operations against Gaza or Lebanon. Israeli officials say Hezbollah is running out of time to come to a diplomatic settlement. After a 3-day trip to Washington earlier this week, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant vowed to bomb Lebanon back to the Stone Age if Hezbollah does not comply with Israeli demands. And I think one of the reasons why Hezbollah will not comply with Israeli demands is there's a concern that Israel will try to invade and take portions of southern Lebanon. And we had this article by Jason Ditz here that may justify some of the Lebanese concerns. He writes, balloons land in southern Lebanon, warning locals that the land belongs to Jews. So messages attached to balloons have begun landing in southern Lebanon, demanding that the locals there are not already displaced by the ongoing attacks and looming threat of a large-scale war to evacuate immediately, declaring the land belongs to the Jews. It is not clear who sent the balloons, but the immediate suspicion is on radical settler groups. The same groups are loudly lobbying Israel not only to invade and occupy southern Lebanon, but to convert the territory into another territory of settlements. The messages don't identify who is dispatching the balloons, but they are written in both Hebrew and Arabic. They landed in villages across southern Lebanon and include a map of Lebanon in the message. While the bellicose rhetoric from the settler group is nothing new, the timing marks is particularly grim, coming as Israel's openly talking about an invasion of Lebanon, and members of the far-right Israeli government are talking about making occupation of its south more permanent. The balloons come to Lebanon alongside Israeli warplanes. An overnight attack on a city in Lebanon wounded 21 people. According to reports, the attack leveled a residential building, wounding 7 people within and 14 others from the ensuing panic. And so just absolutely horrible what Israel and the U.S. are doing to Lebanon. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Again, what a mess of a debate. If you have other things from the debate you'd like me to address, you just send me a direct message on Twitter or something, and I will do that. Like I said, I did suffer through the debate, so I could give you my input on different things, but I don't think there was much else to it. We have a lot of predictions today that Biden's going to be replaced as the nominee. Not so sure that's going to come to fruition, although given the reaction by some of these mainstream Democrats, I really don't want to say that's not going to happen, because it does seem that some would now prefer that outcome. All right, everybody, thank you all so much for tuning in. Back with more shows next week.